Welcome to the 24th floor. I'm Richard Denson alongside Ruben Diaz. The NBA Finals are set. The NBA Draft is right around the corner. And the Memphis Grizzlies sitting pretty at number 3 with the chance to add another cornerstone piece to the roster.
Yeah, we've been talking about this for the last several weeks, and obviously, I'm a big Cam Boozer fan. There's been a lot of people saying Cam's the guy to take, but that might not necessarily be how it plays out, right?
Yeah, because what if he's not available? The noise is getting louder that may be a possibility. So help us sort it all out. We're joined by one of my best friends and one of the sharpest draft minds I know. I mean, if you've got a question about a prospect, chances are he's already watched them play for years. Joining us now on the 24th floor is NBA draft analyst Rish Ghosh. Rish, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure with having this opportunity to discuss this, guys, and really looking forward to how Memphis builds the next era of their franchise.
Rich, I got to ask you, because Rich, this is going to be tough, Rich and Rish, I got to ask you, because Rich is saying that you're the guy who's plugged into all the prospects. So who do you think is the top prospect, regardless of who goes number 1? Who do you feel like is the best overall prospect in the upcoming draft?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a tricky question throughout the year. I've found myself on kind of like essentially like a swing set, kind of going back and forth. But I think I started with Darren Peterson coming into the year. I'm still fairly confident that Darren Peterson is my number 1 prospect. I understand that there's concerns about, how his tenure at Kansas played out with regards to the injuries, the idea that he might be holding out. But I think when you get a shot maker of this caliber that is also exceptional on the defensive side, you can alleviate some of those burdens of defensive responsibility or, the injury concerns and whatnot. And I'm still confident Darren Peterson is, if all goes well in terms of his health, will come out the best player of this draft. But I do think right behind him is Cam Boozer.
I mean, Ruben, you're not a Darren Peterson believer.
And Rich, we'll have this conversation. I'm just not a Darren Peterson. I'm not bought in on the Kool-Aid because I watched him sit too much. And, I've been around college athletics a lot. I've sent a lot of kids to play college athletics. I've talked to tons of college coaches over the years. And just the body language and the unspoken words, the unspoken really sent a negative image, a negative message to me. I just didn't feel like the guy was committed to playing until he knew he had to start playing.
Rish?
Yeah, and I think that's a fair concern. I think especially with the speculation that he was, supposedly holding out at times or asking to be called out based on what we saw on the tape. I think those are reasonable concerns. A lot of the hype behind Darren Peterson and why people are so excited is because when you look at the priors in terms of what he was able to do at prolific prep, and, despite, the injuries, whether he's holding out, whether there's chemistry issues, he was still able to put forth such a productive season, on the box score side, but also on the analytics side. Because if you're kind of putting in a half-based effort, that will show up in terms of analytics. And if him giving this half-based effort is still being one of the best freshman guard prospects that we've ever seen at the college level, I think, that still goes to show a tremendous talent. I don't think he was properly used at Kansas in what you want to see when it comes to an NBA guard. I think he spent too much time off ball to really showcase his capabilities as a ball handler and as potentially a playmaker. And so a lot of it comes to kind of banking on the priors or, the previous outcomes that we've seen as far as his growth through prolific prep and his high school days in various tournaments where he has looked like just the best player on the court when it comes to, going up against Debonsa, where he put over 60 points on him. And that's where I think, you feel a little bit safer with Boozer there. But I think, what we've seen in the NBA right now with 2 electric guards in Ant and Shea, elevating OKC and Minnesota to new heights, we've seen what a two-way guard impact can do for a franchise. And I think when you look at the overall profile of Peterson, it doesn't have those same kind of concerns that you might have with Boozer, how much he plays under the rim, and how much more bully ball he was forced to play at Duke. Although that's another conversation that I think is to be had, that Boozer was also limited in what he was allowed to do at Duke. But I just believe in, when you have a guard prospect like this, especially two-way guards, because a lot of the stars that we have in the league today at the guard position are more so just one-ended, where they're offensively dynamic, but don't give you much on the defensive end, and you have to cover for them. The fact that Peterson is not going to be one of those people, he's going to be in that shy tier where you don't have to hide him on the defensive end, makes that impact so much greater and the potential upside of him so much higher.
So, Rich, you've been following Peterson since high school prep, and our friendship probably goes for a while. I mean, we've probably been friends since pre-COVID, COVID. Just for people who may not know about you, how long have you been studying NBA prospects in general, and what just draws you to this whole draft process and pre-NBA process?
Yeah, so I would say this really started back in 2014, the first kind of big time draft that was announced to the world. You had Wiggins, Embiid, something that was prophesized as generational, and still, a draft that provided so many great outcomes. The Marcus Smarts, the Julius Randles, and so forth. But it also marked one of my greatest failures as an evaluator, and that was Dante Exum. The guard that everyone was comparing to Penny Hardaway at the time. You kind of only had Australian tape to go off of. And I was like 16 years old back then, so I didn't have access to the tools that I do now. But that was kind of my first big slap in the face. Like, hey, just going off what people compare him to and just what it looks like stylistically may not always be the truth of what is revealed. So the draft has always been fascinating to me, just on the premise that it's kind of like a gamble, essentially. You don't ever know what exactly you're going to get in the fullest picture. But I think the idea of researching with contextual evidence, analytical evidence, and what you're able to see on the tape, it's a fun exercise, and it's a good way to really ingratiate yourself with the next stage of NBA stars that are set to come in. I love being able to, show people guys that I'm super high on, and those guys pan out. Like, obviously Wembanyama was more of an obvious home run, but knowing about him when he was 15 years old and showing it to some of my friends in real life, who had no idea who this kid was, it's fascinating to watch them come back to me now and be like, hey, like, you told us about this guy so long ago.
Yeah. So, Rich, so I coach a lot of AAU. We don't really call it AAU anymore, but summer basketball. And I'm sure you're on the EYBL circuit watching games. You're on, all the circuits that are out there right now. How can you talk a little bit about how the differences between watching a kid play in the summer on their club team, on their shoe team, and then watching them play either on prep or in college? Because you mentioned Cam Boozer and Darren Peterson, how neither one of them really got to showcase their true abilities, which maybe they probably did on their EYBL or their summer club teams. Can you talk a little bit about how you have to use those different elements to evaluate what a player might turn out to be?
Yeah, I think with regards to the high school circuit, so much of it has to do with scheduling. Every nationally ranked kid likely has a beautiful stat line to look at. Every kid looks like a future all-star if you just go off their box score stats from what they see in high school. So we use a stat called RSCI, which basically does a good job of filtering it for strength by competition. So, like those EYBL circuits and Pete Jam specifically, like that's a big time one of indicators, because you see so many of the highest talents of high school, regardless of age level, get to showcase their talents against one another. When it comes to that leap that they make into college, or if they go into like OTE, it becomes a little bit more tricky. On the OTE side, it's more just like you have a bunch of kids that are somewhat ranked and whatnot, and they're competing against each other. It's not as organized per se. It's more so every kid wants to do like a showcase. It's kind of like in the early stages of 2K My Career, where they ask you, you have to separate yourself. It's not necessarily about the team, it's about you. When you go into college, alternatively, it is really more of a team dynamic, a system dynamic. I feel like, when you talk about other sports like football or soccer per se, so much of the discussion revolves around, fit, team chemistry, the systems that they run. We don't really have those conversations as much in basketball, because I think, stars are able to separate themselves no matter what in under most circumstances, the best of the best per se. But when it comes to college, especially at these, big time established programs like a Duke, You have to abide by the code that is set. The coaches there have a lot more overruling instinct in how they're going to use you and what they want you to work on or how they want to improve your game. So that's why I think, like, going back to Cam Boozer, if you look at the high school tape, I think he moves a lot more fluid than we saw at Duke. The idea that he's, this unathletic, power forward, it was kind of dismantled by the NBA combine measurements, which, he looked a lot more athletic when compared to the guys that he's going up against in terms of draft rankings. Um, but I think Duke making him more of a bulkier four kind of led to this image that this guy is just this unathletic, dominant sort of college player that doesn't really translate to the pros. But I think priors, again, you when you evaluate a one and done prospect, you can't just go off 1 year. Sometimes that 1 year will show that they can't hang at that level. But if you implement, every piece of data that we're able to obtain, it gives a more complete picture of, hey, maybe this guy just was being asked to do this specifically versus what he's able to do fully.
So I think with Cam Boozer, we really got to see that, obviously, in the tournament where he kind of took over and started showing his real game. And I think that's why more people are kind of coming along with him. But obviously, you know that it's always going to be contrarians, pundits. But as we get closer to the draft, do you think there is any realistic scenario Cam Boozer goes number 2 and he never even makes it to where Memphis can pick him at 3?
Now, if I was working the draft, then I wouldn't let Cam Boozer fall to 3. I think that's guaranteed. But I think there is something to be said about what media speculation means, in terms of the fact that we've been pushed this idea that number one really comes down to Peterson and Debonsa. And both are exceptional talents, of course, but there's definitely been like I haven't seen really any sort of conversation that would suggest that Boozer's even remotely in top two talks. Now, whether I think that's right or wrong, I don't think it's right. But ultimately, I think if at this stage, if there was more of a push for Boozer being in a top two conversation, I'd be more inclined to buy it. But I'd give it somewhere like a 5 to 10% chance that that actually occurs, barring some like league shaking trade.
Yeah, so that was kind of the conversation. There'd been some little bit of rumor about maybe there was going to be some trade and try to happen to bump up. But by your account, can you talk a little bit about AJ Debonsa? We've talked about Peterson. We've talked about Cam Boozer. What are your thoughts on AJ?
Yeah, I mean, I love AJ Debonsa. I think he came from, BYU, of course. I think he's a little bit more raw than people would like to assume. Obviously the numbers look gaudy. This is an offensive dynamo. He gets to the free throw line very often, which I think is a very good star indicator when you project what his scoring outcome can look like in the league. I think this is very much a guy that could at least average 25 in the league without question, as far as, as long as he avoids injuries or anything else. But I think when you look at the other side, that's where kind of the questions come into play. The defensive questions with Debonsa didn't just start at BYU. This has been something that has kind of followed him through his high school career. It's not that he can't defend. He's 6'9", extremely long. The problem is that the steals and block rates, these are usually good indicators of, how much someone is putting effort through the defense. Now, that's not to say if you average a lot of steals, you're a great defender, or if you average a lot of block, you're a fantastic rim protector. But you want those numbers to be higher for someone that, one, you're making your franchise player. But two, also, this is not like a small guard that we're talking about. You can usually bypass those defensive concerns when an offensive dynamo is, one of these like 6'3", 6'4" type of guards. But when it comes to a jumbo wing that Debonsa perceives to be, you really want that defensive effort to be a little bit higher. Now, I do think that is probably coachable, and I don't think they asked him to take on a lot of defensive responsibility at BYU. But as just an evaluator, it's just something I would have liked to see more of, and I think it's just something that people are brushing off too easily.
Rich, you talked about you saw Wemby all back when he was 15. One more question before we got to get you out of here. Give us one player that nobody's talking about today who could become a household name in 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I think when you look at the draft now, I think this draft has been so heavily analyzed that, it's hard to say that anyone with that household name potential is truly unknown at this point.
Yeah.
But I have two main guys for you. I have Ibuka Okori from Stanford.
Yes.
I think he's some
Both
guy
our
like
guys.
the hype behind Darius Acuff is well warranted for everything that he's done in his college career. But when you comparatively put him next to Ibuka Okori, I think the statistical profile and really the analytical profile looks a lot better in favor of an Okori. This is a guy that shows a lot more defensive upside than an Acuff, who projects to be a pretty poor defender. And I don't think Okori is going to become some Derek White or Marcus Smart type defender. This is someone I think you'll be able to hide less of while he's still an immaculate shooter from three, from mid-range. He can get to the rim at will. He has the ball in a sliver. And we've seen, plenty of games, even though it's just Stanford University and obviously they don't play that SEC competition. You trust production, I think, no matter what. And this is a guy that was unheralded coming into the year and showcased, that he is well worthy of a first round pick and well worthy of being in that top guard discussion. Secondarily, I think this is like the analytics darling of this draft, be Alan Graves from Santa Clara. I mean,
Told you. Told
if you
y'all.
just went off the analytical profile, this projects as like a top 10 pick in the draft. And maybe I'm even underselling him. He's got all the makings and all the tendencies of someone that's going to be a dynamic role player for years to come. He is a little bit not in the greatest physical shape as it relates to the NBA, but definitely someone that, if he gets into NBA shape, someone that can exceed his potential, someone that showcases ability on both ends as a good shooter that can stretch the floor as a four, and also, able to create havoc on the defensive end with high steal and block rates. If you're looking for someone that you think maybe can turn into a Walmart Draymond or something of that nature, this could be your guy.
All right, I know we got to let you go, Rich. I will say before we let you go, one thing I really have appreciated during this conversation is your consistency when it comes to the analytics, because I don't think people understand how big of a part analytics plays in the NBA and in college basketball, particularly right now. So, Rich, great job giving us great information today for sure.
Absolutely, my guy. I mean, Rich got me into Okori. Like he was the one who put me on to Okori and Alan Graves, and then I started doing my own research. So I'm glad we got the man who, behind a lot of my takes, it kind of started right here.
So he's been stealing your takes is what he's telling us, Rich. Appreciate you, big dog.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, still ahead on the 24th floor. The NBA Finals are finally here. One of our regular contributors correctly predicted this matchup months ago. So just like Ruben, he's going to come in victory lap.
All right, we'll bring him into the conversation and find out what's his latest prediction and who he thinks is going to win it all and which player could end up taking home the Finals MVP. I have my opinions on that as well.
Stay with us.